recording. Hi, welcome to today's webinar. It's regarding the subject of fixed term contracts and how they're used in the early years sector, and it's come really from a posting that I saw on LinkedIn where the poster was asking about whether the situation they found themselves in was correct really, and it got me thinking that potentially this is a subject that others in the early years sector would like to know more about, hence the webinar. So a little bit about me, that's me on the right. I started my company Redwing Solutions back in 2004. So we've just this month, or the month that's just finishing, just had our 11th birthday, which is amazing. And I started the business when my little man was 6 weeks old. Hadn't really thought through what I was going to do when James came along. I don't think I'd really thought through how work was going to fit around my family, and got inspired really to become an independent HR consultant whilst I was off on maternity leave, and I've never really looked back. I never really intended to specialise in the day nursery sector, but we now work with day nurseries, preschools and out of hours clubs that are across the UK. I guess one of my early clients, retained clients, was a nursery, the nursery that James went to, and really out of that came a lot of doors opening to speak to other nurseries, and an opportunity to build up expertise, and an opportunity to work within the sector, within local authorities, and delivering training for local authorities. So it really came from that really, and we say we absolutely love it. Never looked back at all. So we now are obviously the specialists in HR for early years. So we're not just day nurseries. That's a point to make. Anyone who's employing in the childcare sector, whether it be a childminder that's got staff, or a preschool, whether that's committee run or a charity, we're really here for you. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is contracts of employment. I know it's a bit of a dull subject. Probably not as bad as health and safety, but it's not far up there, is it? In terms of what we're talking about, let's just get a few basics covered, shall we? The first thing is contracts don't have to be written. This idea that we have to give a written document for there to be a contract isn't really true. The contracts don't have to be written. Once you've made somebody an offer and they accept that offer and come and start work for you, you're in a contract with them. And so many of employees will say, well, I've never been given anything, but it doesn't mean to say that there wasn't a contract of employment. They do have rights. So what doesn't have to be given is the contract, but what does have to be given is the written statement of terms and conditions. Now, what I often find when I speak to clients initially and sort of have a bit of a document exchange, you show me what you've got and what you're using, is sometimes the letter of offer has been written as such as it to become the written statement of terms and conditions, because they've listed in that letter of offer the statement. They've put the statement around a letter, if you like, and that's really not exactly the right thing to do, but it's better than nothing. But when it comes to fixed term contracts, you can't afford as an employer to get this wrong. If you take part-time people, they have more rights than full-time people, in law. If you take part-time permanent people, they have more rights than full-time permanent people. If you take permanent people on permanent contracts of employment, permanent full-timers, they're probably the least affected by employment law. There's least amount of law written for their situation. But fixed-term people, like part-time people, have rights. And a part-time fixed-term person, if you get that, would have more rights than a part-time person on their own. So it's really, really important. If your nursery manager hasn't got a contract, well, that's going to be a big deal should your nursery manager leave you. But if your fixed-term contract maternity leave hasn't got a contract, that's going to cause you a problem, a real problem. All right, so it's really, really important that you contract with fixed term people carefully, and not a good idea just to wrap up an offer letter and say that's what that'll do. You've got to do it specifically and do it carefully. It's a minefield, and in terms of contracts, as I say, nothing has to be given if it's a contract, but if it's a written statement, it does, and the written statement has to be given to somebody within 8 weeks of them starting. So again, I do encourage my employers, give them to somebody at the beginning of the relationship, ideally before they land at your setting, so they know what they are signing up for. If you wait until the probationary period has been completed, that's going to be more than 8 weeks. That's going to be 3 months, 6 months in some cases. Don't wait, don't delay. Why would you not want someone to understand their terms and conditions on or before starting? So really don't delay in issuing that document. And the penalty for the employer is if you ended up in a tribunal situation over something else, and they tick the box to say I didn't have a written statement of terms and conditions within 8 weeks, that would add between 2 and 4 weeks in terms of compensation to that person to any tribunal win. So you do end up losing out if you haven't given documentation. There will be a penalty down the road. All right, so it's really, really important that we issue our written statements, and sooner rather than later. So these are our choices when it comes to a contract. I'm going to talk to you today about typical contracts. So in another word, normal contracts, and very, very common. I suppose what makes them typical makes them common. And typical in our land is full-time contracts. Yeah, somebody having a permanent job. Where they are full-time and it's probably their only job. They don't have second or third employment. Also is normal is that we employ part-timers. So we have part-time people that work for us all year round. Yeah, those are typical and normal, and one of the things is that people recognise those types of employment, and so they know what to expect from them. So even if they've not had a part-time employment contract with you yet, they may well have had one with someone else, and the terms may not be terribly different. So if they worked, I don't know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with someone else, they work 3 days a week, they would appreciate that they wouldn't have the holiday entitlement of somebody working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah, so that would have already been previously covered with them. And then we get atypical, and in your industry one of the most common atypical is the term time only. So the TTO, as we call it. So the employment contract is in existence, but the employment activity is only for term time only. So commonly 38, 39 or 40 weeks of the year. So in the employment is continuous from one year to the next, but the activity is only over those weeks. And the employee is clearly free to take employment elsewhere whilst they're not undertaking activity. The casual is atypical. The casual in the sense that someone is able to be given some work for a period of time, so a couple of weeks in the summer to cover a club, or during holidays where you need extra labour, or where you've got sickness and you need extra labour, but where it is a question of I'll need you on this Monday but I won't need you at the end of that period. It's a temporary relationship. I'm offering you temporary employment, but it's not fixed term, but it's in the sense of we are going to have a need for you over the summer, and this is what our plan is. You can also have casuals that are fixed term, but casual temps that come in and go out again. 0 hours would be, in some language, considered atypical. They definitely need to be written carefully, so 0 hours I would put into that. But that's going to be a subject of another webinar, because as you will now know, the law has changed this week with regard to 0 hours contracts, and it makes it a good opportunity to talk about that on a different webinar. And then we have fixed term, where the employment will start on a particular date and end on a particular date. It's not a question of the employer saying we have a need over the summer. It may well be a question we have a need from the 1st of June to the 31st of September, and we are offering you employment in that period. After that, we have no obligation, no guarantee. So let's talk about fixed term contract. They are common when you need someone to cover. So covering a specific person who's going on maternity leave. Hopefully in your setting that's one at a time, though we have known it to be covering Fred and, well, not Fred, because it wouldn't be a Fred, would it? That wouldn't work. Covering Frida and Beryl, in terms of a job share, in terms of both people being off on maternity leave, and we only need one labour in to cover two. But normally it's a question that Betty's having a baby, and you've been hired in order to provide the cover to Betty's job whilst Betty isn't in it. Yeah, so it's a common situation is maternity leave cover. Second one would be long-term sickness absence cover. Again, usually in my experience, this will be where someone said to you, look, this is a situation, I'm going to be off, I know that I'm not going to be back any earlier than this, what do you need to do, what do you want to do? And an employer might decide, do you know what, the fact that we had this notice that somebody's going to be off, we will cover it with a fixed term piece of employment, so we haven't got that worry as to, you know, how we're going to cover it today, how we're going to cover it next week. We brought in somebody to cover, and when the person makes a recovery and returns to work, the fixed term contract will have come to an end. Not quite so common as using other sorts of temporary labour like an agency, but it does happen. And obviously a funded child's hours, this is quite common. So you might have a child with extra needs, additional needs, and you've received additional funding for that child, and you might decide to hire somebody to provide that one-to-one support for that child whilst in your setting. And so whilst the funding is there, there is employment, so it is fixed term contract due to funding for child A. Yep, those are common. Now what you have to remember is employees that are on those contracts have the right to be treated no less favourably. So the actual legislation, the fixed term employment legislation, will use the term less favourable treatment. Okay, so it's really important that you understand what we mean by that. So say you took on a nursery nurse, and you have plans for that nursery nurse to be there for 6 months to cover maternity leave. It would not be okay for you to have a different rate for the nursery nurse than other nursery nurses unless you can have an objective justification. So, you know, again, it could cause problems for you if you would hire somebody on one hourly rate when the person who was doing the job was on a different hourly rate, unless there was an objective justification for that difference. Okay, so, you know, the less favourable treatment regulations, you mustn't avoid those. You mustn't be ignorant of those because they are important. They last for typically a length of time. Well, they always last for a length of time, and typically that will be 6 to 9 months, particularly we think about maternity cover ones, though they can be shorter. I mean, much less than a month. You have to ask yourself whether it's necessary to use a contract, you know, whether a letter could suffice, and there's the debates out that in terms of HR consultants' views on this. But I think if you know the beginning and the end, you should use a contract. It's much cleaner, and we like clean. It's set in advance, and so you know when you hire somebody that they are going to work fixed term, so you mustn't sort of deny them that information. You mustn't keep that information from them. I mean, it's true, when we're hiring we want to have a nice pool of candidates, a nice pool to fish from, a number of candidates, a number of applications. But if you get applications through deceit by not telling people that it's fixed term, what's going to then happen is when you then go to select and you say to somebody, oh okay, you've applied for this job, that's great, we'd like to offer it you, it's only for 6 months, what you're then going to get is dissatisfaction, and you're going to get conflict, and you're going to get not starting off the relationship on the right foot. So even if they accept, they'll be thinking, well, that's no good, that's not what I thought I was signing up for, and you've got a problem from when the relationship is formed. So it's not a good idea to not keep that give that information out. So you know, set it up in advance, make sure you're very clear with people and honest with people. It'll suit some people down to the ground. Fixed term, moving from firm to firm, having variety, not being obligated in the long term, you know, just suits some people, you know. So you know, don't be afraid to be honest. Okay. It will end when the specific task is completed, so it could be that you've got fixed term employment that is linked to a particular piece of funding or a particular project in certain circumstances, not so common in early years, or where a specific event will take place. So somebody returning to work will bring that to an end, or the date will bring it to an end in the sense of, well, we no longer have a need after this date. You can't go from a permanent to a fixed term. So, you know, if you're permanent, say, and you retire and your employer says, well, I want to give you another year, you can't then say they have a fixed term contract. You know, that wouldn't work. The only way that would work is if somebody left and returned after a break of service to undertake a fixed term assignment. So you can't sashay from one sort of permanent contract into fixed term, but you can go the other way. So say you were fixed term for 9 months, and then the decision was taken by the person who you were covering not to return. They gave their notice. Your employer could say, well, I would like to offer you the job. You've been here for 9 months. That's been fabulous. And we would like you to make you permanent. Now, the person who's being offered that could say, you're okay, thanks very much, I'm off. But they could also say, wonderful news, love it here, want to stay. Now, their employment would become permanent, but their start date was the beginning of the fixed term relationship. Yeah, so when you contract them, you would use the start date from the fixed term contract because there has been no break of service. Now, things you need to be careful about with the old fixed term contract. If you don't write them carefully, they can't be terminated easily without you being in breach of contract, which is a big deal if you're going to get sued. Okay, so it's really, really, really important that you write them carefully. And what supports them being written carefully is a really good letter of offer that reflects the fact that we're looking at a fixed term contract here. So phrases like no employment beyond the fixed term period is guaranteed. Really, really important that you get these things right. Start date, end date, and all the caveats that are needed in place. The devil, as they say, is in the detail. Yeah, if you don't get this right, they can cause you major problems. Now, that's just a point on objective justification. You know, no less favourable treatment than their full-time colleagues. That's the thing you've got to bear in mind. So people who are not on a fixed-term contract that are permanent must be can be compared by those who are fixed-term. Now, there can be reasons why you can have an objective justification for there being something different. So here's some examples. Two examples here. Say you fund full-time people having branded coats because you require them to go outside and on trips. They have hats for in the winter or baseball caps for in the summer, a fleece jacket, you give them 5 tops, you give them a tabard, you give them a fleece. Lots and lots and lots of money spent on branding, image and sort of, you know, a personal appearance, but also some degree of protection in there. If that's what you do for your permanent full-time staff, it may well be that it's not worth the investment if someone's going to be on 6 months or less with you, or you might take the view that actually, because we don't like giving second hand to people and people don't like receiving second hand, do you know what, we're going to really slim that down, and that's an objective justification. So due to the cost of the investment, the objective justification was we can't justify it given the length of time you're going to be with us. That would be a route the employer could take. Now, where can it go wrong? Letters, not contracts. Do you remember I said to you at the beginning, what I sometimes see is employers who've written the written statement of contract, statement of terms and conditions, get your teeth in, Imogen, into a letter form, or the offer letter has got a bit more detail in there. That is not a contract, and a contract should be signed by both parties. It should look like a contract. It should smell like a contract, you know. It should refer to the Employment Rights Act 1996. It should talk about when the contract is started and when it will be terminated. It should talk about probationary periods. It should talk about how notice will be given, and it's really important to have that in place. So if you're not using that, you need to get one before you need to do it. And as I say, I like to see it to say maternity leave. So if someone's job title is a nursery nurse and they're on a fixed term contract, I would expect the job title to say nursery nurse brackets fixed term contract to cover maternity leave of, and the name. No doubt about it, what in anyone's mind as to what they are there to do and why they are there. Make sure you don't assume that they know that they're maternity cover. You know, use the phrase maternity leave cover in the offer letter and in the contract. You know, make sure they recognise that what they are here to do. And you know, not getting the signed contract back, not getting a signed acceptance of the offer. I mean, bells and braces, you know, we'll sometimes even go to the point of saying, right, okay, here's the letter of offer. We've written that, we've signed it. We'll have a space to say, if you accept this written offer, you know, we want you to sign that written offer. And we might give that to somebody as a written offer following a verbal offer, and give them 2 copies, one for them to return. And we might do that because we think actually it'd be better for them to have signed a copy of our letter to show their acceptance of the offer than to write a I accept your offer of employment letter back to us. Okay, so that might be belts and braces. In other terms, you might decide, okay, I'm going to give the contract at the same time as the offer letter, so I'm not going to require them to sign the offer, but I am going to require them to return a signed copy of the contract at induction, when they start on the first day. Bring that back with them. So again, if somebody's saying to you, I don't understand what's in paragraph 3, or I don't like the look of clause 10, they can talk to you about that at induction, because you know it's normal when someone starts, you sit down with them, you go through bits and bobs with them, whether it's their bank details, their next of kin information, you know, filling in forms for you to get them started on the system. You can then go through their contract, and not having a signed contract is not a good excuse. Yeah, in 2015 you've got to have done some effort to get that contract back. So just saying, oh well, that's fine, I issued it and they didn't return, isn't going to get you very far. We like to see nice thick personnel files, and clearly it's very desirable to be able to say to somebody, this is the contract you signed, we're now in this situation, we're giving you notice as per that contract, it's ever so sorry, but there is no employment guaranteed, and you knew that when you took the job. People do best in that circumstance, so that's where it can go wrong. Finally, it doesn't work out. If always we could tell if somebody's employment was going to work out, because people can be fabulous at interview, can't they? And evil twin starts, and you're wondering, is that the same person I met at interview? So really, if it doesn't work out, if they are performing unreliably, if they are attending sporadically, you've got a problem. And if you haven't written that fixed term contract correctly, you've got a bigger problem. Yeah, you've got a bigger problem than if you've got a permanent member of staff. So get it written correctly in the first place, get it written carefully in the first place, and you can avoid these problems, because if it doesn't work out, you're going to end up potentially in a conflict situation. But if you have written it carefully, you won't have that problem. Okay, so it's really important to bear in mind, sometimes they won't always work out. Someone who's perfect, you can find isn't. And the other thing is, it can be forgotten. And I've known people say to me, oh, do you know what? I hired them as a fixed term employee. Whoops. They're still here. What do we do now? Yeah, what's the situation now? And that's where it can go wrong, in the sense of, you've thought you've hired them in one sense, or you thought you got them for 6 months and now it's 9, and it's been forgotten, or you thought it was 9 and it's now 12, and nobody's gone back to that person and said, can we extend the contract formally? Can we have something in place to explain the fact? Because, if you imagine 1 week after a fixed term contract ends, if you're still there and there's no paperwork in place, you're going to assume you're permanent, aren't you? You really are. You really are going to assume you're permanent. And there's a whole bag of trouble there waiting for you. So it's really, really important that you get this established in the paperwork to start with. So if we have covered anything today that you found useful, if we've talked about something that you're thinking, I've got a question about regarding that, do get in touch. We'd love you to give us a call where you can natter about your problem and your challenge and talk us through it. It's the number's on the screen, and if you don't want to call, then email is absolutely fine. Just get in touch, and as I say, we'll be happy to help you and see what offers of support might be best available for you. So yeah, do give us a call. Hope you found it useful. Nice to speak to you, and speak to you on the next one. Bye.